The air was heavy with humidity, the kind that clung to the skin and made every breath feel like pulling water through your lungs. The sky above was an endless tapestry of alien hues, shifting between shades of deep indigo and phosphorescent green. Humanity had ventured far into the stars, but even the vast archives of exploration couldn't have prepared one for the peculiar beauty of this planet. Derek adjusted the straps of his oxygen pack, its gentle hum blending into the symphony of chirps and rustling leaves. The isolation of this assignment had been its biggest selling point. No corporate politics, no personal entanglements, just him and the quiet expanse of this uncharted world. A lonely, nameless rock rich in mineral deposits, valuable enough to warrant a lone human operator but not a full crew. His boots crunched against the mossy ground as he checked the perimeter, the glow of bioluminescent plants lighting his path. It was supposed to be a routine check. His tools swung lightly at his belt, the monotony of this daily ritual more comforting than dull. Until something broke the silence. A faint, wheezing sound. He froze, ears straining against the ambient noise. It came again, soft but unmistakable, a sound of distress. His eyes scanned the area, every instinct screaming at him to stay cautious. Yet curiosity was the trait that had brought him this far from Earth, and it pushed him to move toward the sound. Pushing aside a curtain of drooping vines, Derek's heart skipped a beat. There, slumped against the base of a twisted, gnarled tree, was a creature unlike anything he'd ever seen. Its body shimmered faintly, the patterns on its skin glowing in rhythmic waves. The creature was small, humanoid but not entirely. Delicate, fragile, like it had been crafted from the essence of starlight itself. Its breaths were shallow, labored, and its form trembled as if it were on the verge of collapse. Every survival manual screamed at him to walk away. Unknown life forms were unpredictable, dangerous. Yet, he couldn't ignore the pleading eyes that locked onto his, filled with a depth that spoke of sentience, intelligence, even fear. He crouched down slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. The creature flinched but didn't attempt to flee. "It's okay," he murmured, unsure if it could understand. His voice felt small, absurdly human in the presence of something so otherworldly. The creature tried to speak, its lips moving soundlessly, but no words came. A thin trickle of silvery fluid leaked from a wound on its side, staining the moss beneath it. Without thinking, Derek reached for his first aid kit. His hands moved automatically, years of training taking over as he cleaned and dressed the injury. It flinched again but didn't resist. Time seemed to stretch as he worked, his focus narrowing to the task at hand. The wound wasn't deep, but it was surrounded by tissue that glowed faintly, pulsing in tandem with the creature's labored breaths. His medical supplies were rudimentary, barely adequate for human injuries, let alone something so alien, but it was all he had. When he finished, the creature seemed to relax slightly. Its breathing steadied, and the glow of its body dimmed to a softer, more stable rhythm. Derek sat back on his heels, studying it. The creature's eyes never left him, and he could have sworn they were trying to convey something, gratitude, perhaps, or desperation. He debated his next move. Leaving it here wasn't an option. The local predators would smell the blood and finish what fate had started. Against all protocol, against every logical argument his mind threw at him, Derek carefully scooped the creature into his arms. Its body was surprisingly light, its skin cool to the touch. The trek back to his shelter was slow and cautious. He couldn't afford to jostle the creature, nor could he risk attracting attention. Every sound in the underbrush set his nerves on edge, but they made it back without incident. Inside the shelter, the stark artificial lighting seemed jarring compared to the organic glow of the forest. He placed the creature gently on the cot in the corner, layering blankets over its fragile form. The alien's eyes fluttered open briefly, meeting his gaze before closing again. Derek sighed, exhaustion hitting him all at once. He sat down heavily in the chair across the room, his eyes fixed on the strange being in his care. What had he just gotten himself into? The silence stretched on, broken only by the soft hum of the shelter's systems and the creature's now steady breathing. Yet, there was an unease in the air, a sense that something had shifted. He leaned back, letting his eyes close for a moment, but his mind wouldn't stop racing. What was it? How had it ended up here, injured and alone? And why did it feel like the creature wasn't just another alien species, but something more? Derek's thoughts were interrupted by a faint noise. He looked up, startled, to see the creature stirring. Its glowing patterns pulsed faintly, and it lifted one frail hand toward him. Before he could react, the room seemed to shift. A soft hum filled the air, and faint lines of light began to trace themselves along the walls, forming symbols he couldn't comprehend. Tools on his workbench rattled, some lifting off the surface for a brief moment before settling back down. Derek's pulse quickened as the air around him seemed to vibrate with energy. The creature's eyes opened again, locking onto his with an intensity that froze him in place. Its lips moved, and this time, sound emerged, a single, strained word spoken in perfect English. Help! Derek's breath caught in his throat, a chill running down his spine. Whatever this creature was, it wasn't just another alien. It was something far beyond his understanding, and it needed him. The creature's plea lingered in Derek's mind, resonating with an intensity that refused to fade. It wasn't just a word, it was the way it had been spoken, so deliberate, so desperate. The glow emanating from its body softened, taking on a more rhythmic pulse, as if drawing strength from some unseen source. Derek sat down cautiously, his thoughts racing to catch up with the reality unfolding before him. Communication began slowly, haltingly. The creature extended its hand, its delicate fingers tracing shapes in the air that seemed to ripple with faint light. At first, the gestures made no sense, but Derek began to notice patterns, repetitions that hinted at a structured language. He responded in kind, sketching shapes in the dirt with his finger, pointing to objects around the room, speaking simple words. A painstaking process, but progress was undeniable. Hours stretched into days, and the gap between them began to close. Derek learned that the creature was more than an accident of nature. It was sentient, intelligent, and unmistakably aware. What little he could glean from its gestures and faint telepathic impressions painted a picture of tragedy. It wasn't merely stranded, it was running, hiding. The realization struck him hard when the creature revealed its identity. This was no ordinary alien. It was royalty, a princess from a civilization far older and more advanced than anything humanity had yet encountered. Derek pieced together fragments of its story, a betrayal, a coup, and an escape that had brought it crashing to this obscure planet. The injuries weren't random, they were the result of a violent pursuit, an attempt to extinguish its line entirely. Derek's mind reeled at the implications. Royalty? Advanced civilization? His fingers traced the edges of the tools scattered across his desk as he considered the risk. Whoever was after this creature wasn't likely to give up easily. He found himself grappling with questions that had no easy answers. What responsibility did he, a solitary human on a backwater planet, have to a fugitive alien princess? And yet, the answer was there, unspoken but clear: he couldn't walk away. The creature grew stronger as the days passed, its wounds healing under Derek's care. With its recovery came revelations about its abilities. It demonstrated a form of telekinesis, lifting small objects with an effortless grace. The glowing symbols that had appeared in his shelter the first night returned, this time more controlled, more deliberate. It was as if the creature's presence amplified the environment, bending the very fabric of reality around them. Through their fragile communication, Derek learned of the threat looming over them. The princess's pursuers were relentless, capable of tracking her across vast distances. Time was running out, and the shelter, once a haven, had become a trap. The alien's gaze met his, and in that moment, the shared understanding passed between them. They needed a plan. The pressure of the situation brought out a side of Derek he hadn't tapped into in years. His mind raced with ideas, analyzing their limited resources and the slim chance of escape. The alien, though weak, began to assist, offering insights into technology far beyond Derek's comprehension. Its guidance turned Derek's rudimentary tools into something more formidable. Together, they fashioned a makeshift device that could mask their presence, buying them time. Amid the chaos of preparation, Derek found himself marveling at the bond forming between them. The princess, though alien, displayed emotions and intelligence that felt strikingly familiar. Her expressions carried depth, her gestures imbued with gratitude and determination. For all their differences, the connection they forged was undeniable. She wasn't just a responsibility or a mystery to unravel, she was an ally, perhaps even a friend. As the days slipped by, the tension grew palpable. Derek began to feel the weight of every decision, every compromise. The alien's revelations had opened his eyes to a universe far grander than he'd ever imagined, but with that knowledge came a chilling awareness of humanity's fragility. If her enemies found them, there would be no negotiation, no mercy. The realization fueled his resolve. On the last night before they would attempt their escape, the princess reached out to him in a way that transcended words. A gentle touch to his temple flooded his mind with a series of vivid images: her homeworld, a place of breathtaking beauty and intricate architecture that seemed to defy the laws of physics. He saw her people, elegant and harmonious, before the darkness of the coup tore through their civilization. The images left him breathless, awed, and deeply moved. When the connection faded, Derek felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about survival. It was about something far greater. Helping her meant standing against a force that had already wreaked havoc on her world. It meant protecting the light of her existence from being snuffed out entirely. The shelter had become quiet again, the calm before the storm. Derek could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but his determination remained unshaken. He glanced at the princess, who met his gaze with a faint nod. There was no need for words. They understood each other now in a way that transcended language, a bond forged in the crucible of shared struggle and trust. As they prepared for what lay ahead, Derek allowed himself a moment of reflection. The universe was vast, filled with mysteries humanity had barely begun to grasp. Yet, in the middle of it all, here he was, a lone human standing beside a creature from the stars, united by a common goal. The thought filled him with an odd sense of pride. Whatever happened next, he knew this was a moment he would carry with him for the rest of his life. The air in the shelter felt charged, a tangible tension lingering as Derek and the princess worked in silent synchronicity. Every movement, every action carried purpose. The makeshift device they had constructed hummed faintly, its alien components interwoven with Derek's human ingenuity. It wasn't perfect, but it was their best hope for survival. The sky outside darkened, and Derek felt the weight of the moment pressing heavily on his shoulders. He knew time was running out. The princess's pursuers would not stop, and their arrival was inevitable. He checked the small craft parked outside, a basic planetary hopper barely capable of sustained flight. It was never intended for evasive maneuvers or long-distance travel, but it would have to suffice. As they finalized their preparations, a distant rumble echoed through the night. Derek froze, his instincts kicking in immediately. He moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. The source of the sound revealed itself moments later, sleek, black ships slicing through the atmosphere with predatory precision. The pursuers had arrived. The princess placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression calm despite the gravity of the situation. Her presence steadied him, reminding him of the bond they had formed and the responsibility he had chosen to shoulder. Together they moved quickly, gathering their remaining supplies and securing the device that would shield their escape. The first strike came without warning. A blinding light lit up the sky, followed by a thunderous roar as one of the enemy's ships fired a warning shot near the shelter. Derek's heart raced, but he pushed the fear aside, focusing on the task at hand. The princess activated the device, and for a brief moment, the shelter seemed to vanish from the enemy's sensors. It wouldn't last long, but it was enough to buy them a window of opportunity. Derek guided the princess toward the craft, her steps steady despite her weakened state. They climbed aboard, and he powered up the engines, the familiar hum filling the cabin. The craft jolted as it lifted off the ground, and Derek's hands moved over the controls with practiced efficiency. The princess sat beside him, her glowing patterns dim but steady, a silent reassurance that they still had a chance. The enemy's ships reacted almost immediately, their scanners picking up the faint trace of the craft's engine. Derek pushed the controls forward, propelling the craft into a sharp ascent. The landscape blurred beneath them as he maneuvered through the narrow valleys and jagged cliffs that defined the planet's surface. Every twist and turn was calculated, designed to keep them out of the enemy's direct line of sight. The first missile streaked past them, missing by mere meters. Derek gritted his teeth, his focus unyielding. The princess raised her hand, and the craft's systems flickered momentarily before stabilizing. He didn't need to ask. She was using her abilities to reinforce their shields, her energy intertwining with the machinery in a way that defied logic. It bought them precious seconds, but the enemy was relentless. A second missile came dangerously close, grazing the side of the craft and sending it into a brief spiral. Derek fought to regain control, his hands moving instinctively over the controls. The princess closed her eyes, her concentration intensifying as she directed her energy towards stabilizing the craft. Together, they managed to level out, but the situation was becoming increasingly dire. Derek spotted a narrow canyon ahead, its winding path offering a potential escape route. He steered the craft toward it, the jagged walls rushing past as he navigated the treacherous terrain. The enemy ships hesitated, their larger size making the canyon a riskier pursuit. For a moment, it seemed they had gained an advantage. The respite was short-lived. A smaller, more agile ship broke off from the main group, diving into the canyon with ruthless precision. Derek cursed under his breath, pushing the craft to its limits as the enemy closed the gap. The princess, sensing the urgency, extended her hand once more. This time, the air around them seemed to ripple, a faint distortion that engulfed the craft. The pursuing ship faltered, its trajectory wavering as it struggled to compensate for the sudden shift. The maneuver gave them just enough time to reach the canyon's exit, the open sky stretching out before them. Derek angled the craft upward, aiming for the planet's upper atmosphere. The engines strained under the increased pressure, but the craft held together. The enemy ships regrouped behind them, their pursuit relentless. As they broke through the atmosphere, the princess activated a final component of the device. A surge of energy erupted around them, momentarily blinding the sensors of their pursuers. Derek seized the opportunity, altering their trajectory and activating the warp drive. The stars blurred into streaks of light as the craft accelerated beyond the limits of normal space. The sudden silence that followed was almost deafening. Derek slumped back in his seat, his hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. He glanced at the princess, her glow subdued but steady. She met his gaze with a faint smile, her gratitude evident despite her exhaustion. They had escaped, for now. Derek knew the danger wasn't over. The enemy would continue to hunt them, but for the moment, they were safe. He leaned back, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. The princess had spoken of a distant sanctuary, a place where she could find allies and regroup. It would be their next destination, a beacon of hope in the vastness of space. As the craft drifted through the void, Derek allowed himself a moment of reflection. The events of the past days had changed him in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. He had stepped into a story far greater than himself, a tale of survival, courage, and the bonds that could form between the most unlikely of beings. The princess was no longer just a stranger or a responsibility, she was a symbol of something greater, a reminder of what humanity could achieve when it chose to stand for what was right. Derek adjusted the controls, setting a course for the sanctuary. The journey would be long and fraught with challenges, but he felt a newfound determination guiding him forward. The universe was vast, its dangers immense, but in this moment, he knew one thing for certain: they weren't alone anymore. Together, they would face whatever came next, their bond a testament to the resilience and compassion that defined them both.